The story of Jews in Nazi Germany is one of murder and terror on a vast scale. But there is another untold story of Jews who somehow escaped the Holocaust here in Berlin. They survived in the eye of the storm, the capital city of the Third Reich, throughout the war. They grabbed their fate in both hands with a mixture of courage, luck, and astonishing resourcefulness. They were the secret Jews of Berlin. Before the Nazis came to power, there had been 160,000 Jews living in Berlin. They were an integral part of this cosmopolitan city. By 1942, 500 a week were being picked up by the Gestapo and sent from here to their deaths at Auschwitz.
This card was issued to me on the 23rd of January 1939. I was 15 years old on this picture. Here is my fingerprints. And the card, it's not marked that Jude or anything that. The J denotes Jew. I was good looking, no? Good looking boy.
On Christmas Eve 1942, 2 Gestapo knocked at the door here. They had come to pick up Larry and his mother.
I made these 2 gentlemen sit down in a front room, and I will bring them coffee and cake, and I closed the door behind them.
While the Gestapo had coffee and cake, Larry and his mother crept down the stairs. But when they reached the courtyard, they discovered they were locked in. There was no way out.
My mother and I, we went up and knocked on the doors of about 8 apartments each. It smelled beautifully from goose braten, and some of the apartments, they played Christmas music. But none of them was religious enough to take us in. They recognized us. We were part of this house. We were part of their lives. They could not recognize us.
By now, the Gestapo had realized they had been fooled and were searching the building.
All of a sudden, we heard a voice, "Kommen Sie rauf, kommen Sie rauf." A little woman was calling us. She said, "Under the bed, under the bed." The Gestapo men went down without even coming into the apartment. And she came back, closed the door, said, "Meine beiden Engel, my 2 angels, come out, come out."
As dawn broke on Christmas morning, Larry and his mother crept out of the house and went into hiding in Berlin.
We met in 1939. Already Jews were not allowed to go public places.
It was just after my 16th birthday. He hadn't had a 16th birthday yet.
It was a small supper. And I was smitten. I was smitten with her.
Isn't that funny?
And I never ate radishes. I hated radishes. He was feeding me radishes. I devoured them.
Jochen and Ellen grew up in Berlin and they still return for holidays here. As more and more of their Jewish friends were arrested by the Gestapo, the family had to decide what they should do.
My parents thought that we are getting relocated. At that time, we didn't know for sure, any more than anybody else knew, what's going on or what will be going on in the concentration camps. But we had an inkling.
Jochen's father was a doctor in a working-class district of Berlin, so they had a willing network of helpers they could call on.
When we went into hiding, it was Jochen and his father and mother and his sister Ruth, my mother and myself.
We disappeared January 9th, 43.
Across the city, another family were facing life in hiding. The Reichs lived here in the heart of the Jewish area. Ismar's father was a wealthy trader who had died 3 years earlier at the hands of the Nazis. When Ismar went into hiding with his mother, he was just 16.
We had, say, 15 to 20 hiding places, lasting between 1 day, 2 days, a week, various length of time, paying exorbitant amounts for those as an incentive to let us stay there.
The Nazis had been rounding up Jews piecemeal, but now they decided to finish the job once and for all. On February the 27th, 1943, the SS arrested 10,000 Berlin Jews. From now on, to be Jewish was a death sentence.
Als ich Joko schön war, ist schon lange her.
Even half-Jews like Ika were in danger.
Verhaftet worden bin ich bei Siemens. Es war an einem Sonnabend, morgen. Ich glaube, das war der 27. Februar. Ich weiß das aber nicht so genau. Und dann wurden wir auf Lastwagen geladen, verstaut. Dann hat man die Plane runtergemacht, da ist man mit uns losgefahren. Man hat uns aber nicht gesagt, wohin wir kommen. Man ist einfach losgefahren.
Ika was taken with 2,000 other half-Jews and intermarried Jews to a temporary prison here at Rosenstrasse.
Und da komme ich auf den Gang raus und gehe so ein paar Schritte. Da ist mein Vater, steht ja vor mir. Mein Vater schreit dann ganz laut Eka, abgekürzt Eka genannt immer. Ich habe ja nicht gewusst, dass er da ist und er hat nicht gewusst, dass ich drin bin.
The non-Jewish wives and mothers of the prisoners held a vigil outside.
Wie meine Mutti hat gerufen, ich möchte meinen Mann und mein Kind wieder haben. Aber auf eine ganz ruhige Art, so dass die Polizei und die Gestapo keine Chance hat zu schießen.
The protesters stayed here in the square for a week until their husbands and children were finally freed. This is the only example of successful civil protest against the Nazis. No one knows exactly how many Jews escaped the final roundup, but it ran into thousands. The Gestapo started to hunt them down on the streets of Berlin. The secret Jews' ingenuity and quick-wittedness was tested to the limits as they ducked and danced one step ahead of the Gestapo.
I always had to find something new. I wasn't like Anna Frank. I couldn't hide into a cubby hole and have people bring me food. I had to make my own food. I had to get my own dollars and my own mark. I made my own life. I was never on anybody's list but my own. Only Gestapo had my name. Nobody else. The shortage of young men in general on the street was telling all over. It was a country of strictly women, old and young. The men were fighting, especially in 1943. Forget it. Most of the time I stayed overnight by girls, where I paid with sex for food. I played in the pool room, I made money. I made good money playing cards and cheating. And we broke into stores. We robbed stores.
Well, it looks the same way. It looks the same way, except for the bicycles.
Yeah. And you see, up there's Köhler's window and Mr. Köhler and Clara. It's really exactly
amazing.
Jochen Arndt was working in this factory by day and sleeping here at night. No one except Mr. Köhler, the owner, knew he was Jewish. Gradually, the rest of the family came to join him.
It shrunk, changed. Jochen would say to Mr. Köhler, I don't know what to do with my sister or my girlfriend and her mother. He would say, well, let them come here. If they catch me hiding you, they'll do me in, and if they catch me hiding 6, the penalty is the same. And they were very stoic about it. And here is the former entrance to the air shelter.
Yeah.
Keeping a group of 7 Jews hidden even from the factory workers required iron discipline.
The mothers got locked up in the cubicle in the back. Minus bathroom, with just 2 bunks with straw, and they'd be quiet.
Then
no talking, no coughing.
My mother-in-law
no
had a cough, so every once in a while, because the machines made noises too, but the cough you could still hear. So every once in a while I would go into that locked room. This was a secret room, off limits to the rest of the crew, and I would cough so that she could clear her chest and throat, you know.
I think they were very uncomfortable and not terribly happy, but they knew there's no choice.
When the factory closed for the weekend, the family could move around a little more freely.
The little shop, Hans' little shop, that's what we used as a living quarter over the weekend. It was easier to heat, had a little stove, it had a long workbench by the window, and we would sit there, and in order to stay civilized, Ruth would do everybody's nails.
We played games.
Yeah, the boys played chess. And,
we made chessmen out of, the board of course is easy to make, and then since we didn't have any chessmen, we took a black pipe, iron pipe, cut it into little pieces. Those were the pawns. And then the larger pieces, only he and I knew who is who.
Secret Jews moving around the streets of Berlin were running a great risk. Any German citizen could be asked to produce papers, and spot checks were common in wartime. With a little ingenuity, Ismar found a way around this.
In order to have documentation, I had purchased some passports, which were in other names, and falsified them myself in the following fashion. I took off the old picture, inserted my picture, duplicated the stamp by taking it off the original documentation with an egg, and transferring the stamp onto my picture. This then gave the authenticity to the passport.
Appearance was everything. If you wanted to pass as non-Jewish, it was vital you didn't look like the Nazi idea of a Jew. The anti-Semitic newspaper Der Stürmer published illustrations to help the Germans spot the Jews among them.
The fact that I had blonde hair in those days helped a lot. I looked like everybody else. I did not look like the drawings in the Stürmer. I didn't have corkscrew curls in black that stood out straight from my head. My nose didn't reach the wall. And so I did not fit the picture.
And even I, who had real dark hair, did not look Jewish, according to the stereotype. I, of course, had to be very careful for something entirely different.
Yeah.
If we went to a bath, which was down the street here, a public bath.
On Moritzplatz there was a public bath.
Since we are Jews and we're circumcised, and the Germans generally are not, we had to make sure that nobody would peek through or whatever, because that would give us away. Or if you went to a public urinal or something, you had to be absolutely sure that nobody would look. So, which to us even at that time was funny.
By now, the Gestapo were catching and deporting about 350 Jews a month from Berlin. Sometimes the safest place to be was on the streets. On the 20th of April, 1943, Larry decided no one would suspect him if he joined the crowd celebrating Hitler's birthday.
I grabbed my satchel and I went like this. And I used to say always, that's how high the shit is in Germany, you know, but I said it to myself. And made my arm go up easy, you know. And the more Nazis you saw, the higher you went. Music was playing on loudspeakers. Some of the loudspeakers were Goebbels' voice, which is very distinct voice.
In den nächsten Wochen und Monaten zu großer Offensiven antreten werden.
Geliebter Führer, wir gratulieren dir. You know, he spoke with a elongated tone, very distinct. And it was something like hypnotism. And he was extolling how great our Führer is, how proud he made us, how he led us into victory, because the Germans were beating the daylights out of everyone. It was a picture of happiness all over the country. And you know something? Sometimes I felt, why didn't he let me be part of it? I'm a German too. If you have no legs, you can walk. If you have no ears, like I'm a little deaf now, you can hear. If you're a Jew, you can't be a German. And it hurt. It hurt me very much.
By mid-1943, Allied bombing was devastating Berlin. This was dangerous for all Berliners, but doubly so for Jews in hiding.
We could not go into any bunker. We had to just be in the house. I remember very vividly that I basically prayed for the planes to come and smash Berlin to hell.
I used to look up, and the American fighter planes, left and right, going around the big American fortresses, and the bombs were coming out. And I sat up there being happy and laughing knowing the bombs were not meant for me.
When the air raid shelter around the corner suffered a direct hit, Jochen couldn't resist going to see.
I went there after the air raid, and really we didn't know who was in there, to enjoy the sight, if you will. When we...
Okay.
When we came there, it was all children and mothers. And the Germans who already started to try to dig those people out were, I don't know why, but they were stupefied. We got out 7 children. I can't remember whether they were, yeah, some of them were real tiny and others were toddlers, I wouldn't know how old. 7 children, and the mothers we couldn't get out. All we could hear was their screaming, their moaning, and also children still. There were roughly, if I recall correctly, 200 or something children and mothers. Even though those were German children or German mothers, we could not just stand by.
Blow your nose.
In the summer of 1943, the Gestapo developed a new technique for finding secret Jews. They bribed and threatened Jews who'd already been captured to betray their own people. The Gestapo offered these Jews a choice. They could face death, or they could buy their own survival by working for the Nazis. They would search the streets of Berlin for people they knew or suspected were fellow Jews. The most dangerous of the catchers, or Greifers as they were called, was Stella Kübler. She caught hundreds of Jews in the 2 years she worked for the Gestapo. Ellen and Stella had been at art school together. This put Ellen in particular danger.
Yeah. I ran into her in a restaurant. My mother always got dressed, you would think she was going to go to the bridge club or something, with the hat with the feathers and the furs hanging to the floor, you know. And so my mother was very small. She was even shorter than I am. And fortunately, she was walking in front of me. I was holding the big door. And I look over her hat, and on the end of the room, there is Stella and her fellow catcher, Isaacson. I thought I was going to die. So I thought I was going to really die. So I pulled my mother back, couldn't say a word. My mother just looked at me. I think she must have seen I was terror-stricken, you know. It was her feathery hat. She had this whole chicken on top of her head that saved me because she was so short. And we kept on changing bus to a streetcar to subway for hours because I was afraid she might have seen us and either she or Isaacson would follow us.
So we have to see how that goes.
Whenever I was out, I was constantly aware of the danger lurking outside. I went out maybe once a week and bought food on the black market. I ran into a young girl, woman, very pretty, and I just glanced at her, but we bonded immediately and had an immediate chemistry between us. Erika knew that I was Jewish. She herself was a German Christian young woman who, however, accepted me readily as a Jew, as a human being, and ultimately as her lover.
I can say I had terrible days in the underground. Nobody should have them. But I had sometimes days and nights, they were so beautiful. When you're young and you want to live, you do everything. I was laying there on the beach, white like I had no tan, and I sleep. All of a sudden a ball hits me and a woman wakes me up and said, "Mister, you're gonna burn." We got very friendly. She said, "You know, I promised my husband that I would call him. Why don't you come along?" She told me, he made so many children for Hitler. Says, "Now I'm gonna have a child from somebody else." And the phone booth has milky glass where you see that the phone booth is inhabited. You might not see movements. I didn't know that. But who the hell cared? And while she was talking to her husband, this thing happened. I said to myself, I hope you carry a real Jew in your belly. And that was for me the greatest satisfaction, to give a Nazi a Jewish child.
I knew Erika about 6 weeks when I was caught by the Gestapo. I went out in order to swap some food, and I was confronted by about 3 civilians, which turned out to be Gestapo. As I turned, there were another 2 in the back of me. Later on, it turned out to be one of them was a Greifer Goldstein, who was a Jew. The others were all Gestapo people. I kept on insisting my name is Carl Schmidt, at which time they opened the door and a friend of mine came in, whose name is Henry Atlas, who immediately shouted, "Isma, did they catch you too?"
Henry Atlas and his brother Horst were friends of Ismar's, who had been captured in the same week as him.
The Gestapo tried to use any kind of force in order to make me talk, asking where my mother was. They obviously hit me in order to find out more, and even brought in a fellow that they had pretty well devastated before, and they hit him some more so that the man died, and used that as a tool to tell me, listen, if you don't talk, the same thing will happen to you. And I told him, there's nothing I can help you with, so therefore you do what you have to do. I can only die one way. There's only one death for every one person, so it was a toss-up. Do I die there, or am I sent to my death?
Here at Grunewald Station, all captured Berlin Jews were loaded on the trains for the concentration camps.
On the 10th of September, we were herded together. There were a whole bunch, I don't recall how many, soldiers in gray uniforms with the SS insignia, the dead on their cap. The officer held a speech that nobody will escape and that they will bring the entire transport to Auschwitz.
By autumn 1943, over 4 million Jews had been killed by the Nazis.
This is my transport here. See, the 10th of September is so obviously 50 people perished. Take a picture. Once we got settled in our section on the left side of the train, I told Henry and Horst that I had smuggled through some tools and that I would try to see if I can possibly get an opening so that we can escape. We then clustered around one another to shelter us from the other people, because in all probability, and I don't think I assume incorrectly, the other people would have denounced us. I then started to drill some holes into the side of the wagon. The tools that I used for the escape were this hand drill, with which I created holes in a downward fashion, drilling one hole, then the next hole, then the next hole, then the next hole, until I had sufficient room to use this metal saw blade.
With the tools he had smuggled from the Gestapo prison, Ismar started to cut through the 3-inch thick walls of the cattle truck.
We started to sing nostalgic songs very, very loudly to overdrone the noise of the saw. We kept on singing and people were complaining. This little baby was crying and people were just saying, are you completely out of your mind to sing while we are going into our death?
It took 6 hours to cut a hole big enough to jump through.
The first one that jumped out was Henry. The second one was Horst. When I jumped out, I had pretty much mentally prepared myself to jump away from the train in order not to be crushed under the wheels. I jumped, I fell flat on my belly. I picked up my head and I saw the red lights of the back of the train quite a distance away and felt relieved. It worked. From what I learned after the war is that entire transport went right into the gas chamber, including a 1-year-old child.
By September 1943, the secret Jews who had survived in Berlin had been in hiding for 7 months. Once Ismar jumped from the Auschwitz train, he made his way back here. Now the Gestapo had his name, he was in even greater danger. He and his mother were taken in by his girlfriend Erika's family.
Erika, who was a very kind-hearted woman, said, "I'll take you with me and you will stay with my parents." I did not go out at all any longer because I didn't need to fend for food. The father bought the extra food on the black market for us. And I was anyway deathly afraid to be outside because the Gestapo was then looking for me, specifically looking for me. It was not anymore a global find the Jew, but it was find the escaped Jew.
Ismar was trapped in Erika's father's house. When danger threatened, he and his mother hid in a 2-foot gap behind a false wall. A few months later, the situation grew even more difficult.
Erika came one day and told me that she's expecting. And I was very, very, very surprised and, of course, devastated. I felt extremely worried what's going to happen. If they find out that we had a child together and that she is partly Jewish, not only I, but she, her whole family, and everybody else would be killed. Erika's child, my son, was born in October 1944.
By the autumn of 1944, the Germans were losing the war. The push to exterminate the Jews seemed to grow stronger. Berlin's half-Jews had been allowed to survive the final roundup, but the Gestapo took any opportunity to send them to the camps. When Ika injured her arm and couldn't work, she too was in danger.
Wir sind hier in dem Haus, wo die Parteizentrale war und wo ich vorgeladen wurde. Er hat mich damals unterhalten und hat der gesagt zu mir, dass ich wegen meines Armes, der nicht geheilt ist, zur Heilbehandlung weggeschickt werde und dann wird das besser. Und als er das sagte, war mir klar, dass ich nach Auschwitz komme. Denn es wurde allen erzählt, die sie abgeholt haben, immer irgendwas, die müssen gesund werden und armer, weiß ich was. Ja? Und war so ein großer, stattlicher Mann. Aber stattliche Männer sind ja leider Gottes immer feige. Und als die Sirene ging, war Fliegeralarm, die Sirene ging, da ist er gerannt. Und zwar in den Luftschutzkeller, da drüben ist er. Das war für mich die Gelegenheit, alle Papiere, die auf seinem Schreibtisch lagen, einfach mitzunehmen. Und dann bin ich nach Hause gerannt während des Alarms zu meiner Mutti und habe gesagt, Mutti, so und so ist es, ich muss weg. Nachher das Alarm kam. Also für mich war der Fliegeralarm eine Erlösung.
After 21 months in hiding, Larry was captured in a Gestapo raid on the pool hall. He was deported on one of the last transports from Berlin.
The Transportliste of the 52nd Osttransport, September, what's the date? What does it say here? 1 second. 6 September 6, 1944. And all these names are the last Jews of Berlin. Lothar Israel Orbach, born on May 22nd, 1924, that makes me today 75, almost 75 years old. I was born in Falkenburg in Pomerania. I'm an Arbeiter. You know what an Arbeiter is? A working man. They transported animals on this car, and that's how we went to Auschwitz.
By the time Larry arrived at Auschwitz, 1 million Jews had died there.
I walked outside, and the minute I stepped outside, one prisoner got up from a bench, a wooden bench, and a little table standing in front of the bench, and he made me sit down very politely, very nice, and he took my left arm, he took out a pen, and he heated up the pen. Whenever he made a letter and a number, he always had some kind of a heater, and he pushed it into ink and to the heater, and he put in the number B9761. Now it was a number, not anymore a man, not anymore a person.
In April 1945, the Allies reached Berlin. For 12 days, Russian soldiers fought a street-by-street battle for control of the city. Berlin was destroyed around them, but the hidden Jews knew they were nearly free.
There was no more water or anything, and you had to wear your helmet and crawl on your tummy with 2 pails. And we took turns. It was my sister-in-law's turn. It was Ruth's turn. She got dressed in her helmet and crawled across the street. And all of a sudden, I see her standing up in the middle of the street. And I'm yelling, "Get down!" And she's shaking her head, and she's coming back with the empty pails. "What's going on?" She says, "The Russians are here. They're in the street giving out pickles." I got Ruth, and we went outside, and oh, it was great, you know. And my father-in-law came walking down the street. He took one look at the 2 of us out. He grabbed us by the arm. He said, "Up there," and he locked us up.
But because the young women got raped.
We figured it was all propaganda, you know.
But to our really enjoyment, they did rape German women.
You see, you had it coming. You were the ones who yelled, "Heil Hitler." You were the ones who had Führer's picture. You were the ones who voted for that man. You know, be my guest. It fortunately goes away after a while.
Around 1,500 secret Jews made it through the war in Berlin. This is a tiny number compared to the dead, but many German cities had almost no Jewish survivors.
I basically held every German responsible. I told Erika that I definitely will not stay 1 day longer in Germany than I have to, and that I have registered to go to the United States I would like to marry her and take her and my boy with me. She decided she wanted to stay in Berlin with her son.
Even though it meant deserting Erika and his 2-year-old son, Ismar could not bear to stay in Germany. Ika did stay in Berlin and brought up 3 children here.
Heidi, ich muss Ihnen sagen, ich bin in Berlin geboren. Ich bin ein Berliner Kind. Und ich wollte eigentlich nie weg. Und ich habe mich auch immer als Deutsche gefühlt. Wisst ihr, man kann ja nicht mal gleich vor allem ausrücken. Ja, also, ich habe gedacht, jetzt kann ich leben. Wisst ihr, wie ich das meine, ja? Ich bin hier geboren, jetzt kann ich leben.
This little synagogue was rebuilt, and we had the first Jewish wedding in Berlin after the war.
We got married here in 1945.
46.
Oh God.
Cut. 45, she's right.
We were married in 45 and 46. We went to the United States.
Sorry.
We were married here in 45 and were attended by all the people who had helped us. They were all here. And all 7 of us eventually ended up in the United States because we all happened to live through the whole thing together.
Larry survived Auschwitz. He too left Germany and emigrated to America in 1946.
I loved Berlin, and I can't hate Berlin. Berlin had nothing to do with it. It's my generation, Germans, today the gray-haired ones, the ones that cannot look us in the eye, the ones who know what they did. And they did it with pleasure. They did it with pleasure, with profits, with pride, with Nazi pride that made a Jew out of me. That's one thing that I grant Hitler, that he made a Jew out of me.
When I came to the States, I had nightmares for a long period of time, constantly recurring dreams of being hunted by the Gestapo and reliving the fear. I do not want to fall into a trap of giving the satisfaction to the Nazis, of continuing to suffer due to their treatment. I was able finally to suppress any dreams whatsoever.
Was that good?
Forcing myself to sleep and got a little bit more peace of mind.